So today I'm with Thomas Cox. You may recognize this gentleman from the EOS community. I believe self-described on Twitter as a blockchain governance expert, which I actually saw Thomas the other day on Twitter. Someone said there's no such thing, which you may or may not agree with. I'm sure you probably agree with that as well. Hey, what can you say? So Tom and I have got together
I could call myself a pathetic governance noob.
You could. That wouldn't help your credibility as much.
Would it be really all that different in such a novel space?
Right, and it's always evolving. So Thomas and I have got together to talk about the governed blockchain vis-a-vis EOS, my favorite project of all time in the crypto space, and one that Thomas is as enthusiastic about as well, I imagine. So Thomas, welcome to the Cryptoverse, first of all.
Thank you very much for having me.
Where are you coming to us from today, mate? It looks like it's daylight for you.
It is, yes. I'm in Blacksburg, Virginia, home of Block One, software developers for, there's the core team back there, about half of them.
Wow.
It's fairly late in the afternoon.
Well, it's about 9 p.m. for me in the UK, so yes. We've managed to synchronize calendars in that way.
They're not too upset with me doing this interview as long as I don't yell.
Ah, that's fine. You're in my ear anyway, so...
normally I'm in Oregon. That's where I live.
Oh, you live in Oregon? I did not know that. I know you travel around quite a bit. So, okay. So, first question, Thomas. What on earth do we mean by the governed blockchain? Can you give us an overview of that?
So, what is governance?
Right.
And so,
is that the same as government?
Related. So, governance, the way I use the term, the way I like to describe it, is there's sort of threefold. There's making collective decisions.
You
can imagine that's your family trying to decide where to go on summer vacation, or a bunch of crypto nerds trying to decide what the block size should be, or anything else where we have to work together on this one, right? Because if we could just all do our own thing and we didn't have to coordinate in any way, there's no need for collective decision making or collective action. It's all just individual stuff. So occasionally it's appropriate to do collective action.
So is that like consensus over the decision making process
when
itself?
that is. And so, often, boy, we'd all be better off if we use the same block size, or our software will actually work together if we use the same API. What should the API be? Things like this. So collective decision making, number one. Number two is carrying out the decision after it's made, transparently, reliably, verifiably, is also part of governance. And then third is tweaking your mechanisms for decision making. Like last time, we all had a vote, but two people here were from the same company. And that's not fair. Let's do one company, one vote. Well, I don't know, but our company put in twice as much money as you. And blah, 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 blah. We go around and around. One token, one vote. One person, one vote. Is it hash power? Like, what's the mechanism? What's the standard? And we could decide to do it one way one time and then change it the next time. But how do we change it? How do we record the rules and bind ourselves to those rules? And so that system of rule tweaking, setting up rules, tweaking rules, tremendously important. It's also part of governance. So it's kind of that bootstrapping effect. How do you create the first constitution when there's no constitution and there's no way to vote? How do we vote something in with no voting mechanisms? Like, what's the legitimacy of the first vote when nothing's legitimate because nothing's been voted on?
Right.
So there's all these little bootstrap questions, and then having a way to tweak things so that you don't drift away from your purpose, so that you can respond to whatever the reality is on the ground. So governance is those three things: collective decision making, carrying the decisions out, and tweaking the rule set by which you choose to make decisions.
Mm-hmm. So then it becomes
so how does that apply to blockchain? Well, when do you ever have to make any collective decisions on a blockchain? And occasionally you do. And we've seen that some of the loudest internecine warfare in Bitcoin, Ethereum, whatever, often have to do with the need and the frustration, the sense that we need to change the block size. To what? How? Who decides what we do? Well, who made you king? Blah, blah, blah. And so Ethereum recently had a big, we're recording this here in June of the end of June of 2018. Mm-hmm. And I think it was late May, early June. The Ethereum folks had a huge meeting focused entirely on governance. And their big takeaways were that they needed to figure out who their stakeholders were and how to measure what those stakeholders wanted. And I thought, that's brilliant. Yes, good first step. And then maybe they'll figure out how to poll them and how to give legitimacy to those decisions. Wait, who counts the votes? And so you can see that they're trying to bootstrap. What EOS did very deliberately was to build all those things in up front, that we know who the token holders are our stakeholders. And if somebody wants to develop apps, that's lovely, but if they don't own any tokens, they don't get any vote. That's totally arbitrary. It's just what we decided. We also chose one token, one vote. Could have been one person, one vote, but that's harder. We could have decided that. We didn't. We've chosen to make everything amenable to voting change. So inflation rate, the rule set. I don't know anything in the entire system except maybe certain aspects of the core consensus protocol or maybe some of the encryption code. Everything else changeable by a vote. Now, not directly changeable. There's some steps in there that slows things down and creates some human intervention required. But absolutely, this is a chain that can, through a formal governance process that's been defined before the launch, can, at least theoretically, reach conclusions that are final and binding, that people will take as legitimate, that will allow it to steer and change, adopt new protocols. If someone wants to say, hey, let's do Z-snarks, okay, great. Show us an implementation. We'll vote on it. Okay, we love it. It's in. Oh, it sucks. Get it out. We vote it out. Whatever. Inflation to 7%. No, it's terrible. 3%. We could take back up to 5. Whatever those are. Let's change it from one token, one vote to a bicameral situation with the token vote in the House of Lords and then verifiable strong ID in the House of Commons. It's like, oh, that'd be cool. And it could be a mess. We don't know. But the fact that we have baked in governance, I mean, we can ask those decisions, reach answers, and implement them. And you cannot do that without some form of formal governance. And I'll tell you the backstory on this. There's work done back in the 1990s by Lawrence Lessig, Lessig. He put together something called the New Chicago School Model. I love that because I went to the University of Chicago. It makes me happy. And he said that human behavior in technology systems are constrained by 4 forces: the code, market forces, the law, and social forces, all 4. And that's, you know, look at the internet. You've got the protocol, the code that controls whether or not you can do certain things. Then you've got social forces that, you know, on Reddit, certain behaviors expected. On LinkedIn, very different behaviors expected. That could change. You know, anybody who went on the old Usenet knows that certain forums were very different than others in terms of behavior. Then you've got legal forces. You can go to jail for things you do online. There could be certain, you know, legal restrictions on what you can and can't say or do, what you can or can't sell. And then market forces, we've seen market forces harnessed through the code, of course, but the market forces are very powerful in Bitcoin because the code financially incentivizes you to be honest because it's cheaper and you make more money by being honest than by trying to lie to the chain because of the brilliance of Satoshi Nakamoto. And so you can see how just in Bitcoin, only 2 of the forces are in play and you can do amazing things. And Ethereum tries to add a little social work through the social force through the IPs, but as I mentioned, their governance is still informal, off-chain, and contentious and slow. Our attempt is to keep the market forces that secure the blockchain, keep the code that keeps us cryptographically secured, formalize the legal and the social forces, and bring them into play as well from the beginning so that we have a constitution. Now, Cardano has also set up a constitution. I believe it's Tendermint says they've got a constitution. I haven't read it. And so several other projects have constitutions, but we are the only public operational blockchain with a constitution. And that constitution has not yet been ratified because we don't have a referendum contract yet. And so there's some discussion about, well, is the constitution really binding? It's a good question. We also have arbitration. It's baked into the Constitution to say that if you have a dispute anywhere on this blockchain, you will take it to arbitration. You can choose who your arbitrator is, you and your counterpart, in your dispute. And by default, we have an existing forum called the EOS Core Arbitration Forum, ECAF, ECAF, that will hear anything that isn't otherwise handled. So if you and your dispute partner don't pick somebody in advance, or you can't pick somebody after you start the fight, and you insist on arbitration, you'll go to ECAP. So having the ability to take collective action, to define who a stakeholder is, to raise a dispute and settle the dispute according to a set of rules that you've all agreed to in advance, is the definition of governance. And you see it in trade associations, professional associations, private clubs, as well as governments, and now on a blockchain. And we're like a whopping, 2.5 weeks in, and already we're having scandals, and I don't think there's been any ministers of parliament thrown out of office yet, but I'm sure it's just a matter of time.
You mean in terms of block producers being voted out?
Potato, potato. You get my point. Is that we've introduced politics, right, as a new layer, or I should say formal politics with actual voting into the blockchain process, and it's been really actually remarkable that just the fact that we vote on block producers has made the block producers incredibly responsive to public pressure. They're trying to be squeaky clean. They're trying to do extra things to make the populace happy. It's like, oh, we're sponsoring this block explorer. Oh, look, we provide these services. There's a whole factional fight over whether cloud versus bare metal is better. And I think there's going to be a migration to bare metal because I think the votes are going to go that way. I'm just predicting. And just the fact that we can tap the sentiment of voters, token holders, through just the one mechanism of the block producer vote is already steering us quite dramatically, I think. And that's only going to increase when the referendum comes online and our worker proposal system becomes empowered, because we're collecting money in a worker proposal fund right now to the tune of 100,000 tokens a day, earmarked for blockchain improving projects that are proposed, that the token holders vote in. And you can imagine that could be really exciting for some people to get. I think the balance in there right now is a couple $1 million. And did I mention we've only been running for a couple of weeks? So, after 360 days, we'll have 3.6 million tokens. No, 36 million tokens. And that could be worth quite a tidy sum, divided up across many projects. Okay, so what qualifies as a project? Who's going to be the gatekeeper? How shall votes be counted? How shall the money be overseen? These are all collective choices to be made. And so you can see that we're already deep into the thick of it in terms of defining our community by who owns tokens, and then saying, hey, we've got a collective interest in the health of the chain. How do we keep the chain healthy? How do we keep each other accountable? How do we cooperate?
Now, I have a theory as to what the answer to this is in my own mind, but I want to hear it from you. So what is it about having this governance system in EOS on a blockchain that makes the block producers behave in the way they do, competing to add the most value, versus, because with the fear of getting voted out, versus a offline political system where you vote in a party to carry out their manifesto with the fear that if they don't, they're going to get voted out? I have a theory of what the answer is. What's the difference? But
one of the differences is that block producers don't set policy. The powers of block producers are extremely prescribed. They have actually almost unlimited power if they all work together. The design principle is that 15 out of 21 block producers, if they all sign the same transaction, they have multi-sig power that overrules the regular security settings of the system. So if, let's say you've been found to have taken my CryptoKitty and you refuse to give it back, and an arbitrator has ruled against you, and they say, that's actually Thomas's CryptoKitty, Chris, give it back. And you just say, no, I'm not going to do it. Then the block producers, upon receiving the arbitrator's validated, confirmed order, here's a transaction that reassigns ownership of the CryptoKitty from Chris back to Thomas. If 15 of them sign it, it goes in a 30-day queue. After 30 days, it rolls forward, and then poof, it gets reassigned, even though you didn't do it.
I didn't authorize it, right?
And so that's pretty daunting to somebody who's grown up in the old school Bitcoin, Ethereum, immutability world where the code is law, and if you write a bug, it's not a bug because the code is law, and whatever happens, and it is immutable. You put a token somewhere it doesn't belong, you cannot get it back. Send the token to a contract that doesn't know how to receive that kind of token, boom, it's gone forever. Look at the Parity wallet, $300 million worth of Ether, just destroyed. And yet it's still on the chain. I mean, you can look at it, it's there. You just can't ever get it back, ever, because the code is law. You've got Bitcoin addresses on a hard drive from 5 years ago, and now it's worth 20, 30, 50, $100 million. But you recycle that hard drive because you hadn't thought about it in a while, and now you're like, oh, somewhere at the bottom of that landfill is a hard drive worth $100 million. But we can't find it, or it's deteriorated and we can't recover the keys. Okay, those Bitcoin gone forever. And there are use cases where that is absolutely correct and perfect and wonderful. And there are other use cases where you'd actually like to be able to recover your keys, where you'd like to be able to freeze an account, fix broken code, return the Parity wallet money, the $300 million, to the rightful owners. Okay, then you ask, well, when? Well, why and when? And that is where governance and the rule set and the expectations are tremendously important, because if you start breaking the fundamental rules because you've got these superpowers that I mentioned, who would trust anything on this system? And let's just leave now. All right, so the rule is the intention of the contract outranks the execution of the contract.
Mm-hmm.
Which allows you, if you had a Parity wallet, $300 million explosion on an EOS blockchain, even theory could then say, hey, wait, I need my arbitrator. We have an arbitrator set up, or we go to default arbitration. We say, I promise you, arbitrator, that both I, the customer, and the developer, the two parties in this transaction, neither one of us intended to destroy the money. Look at the code, look at our Ricardian contract where it states the intention. Nowhere in here does it say destroy the money. Now, you can imagine there are contracts that say destroy money, like to burn tokens, right? Mm-hmm. Totally, that happens.
Sure, that happens.
In which case, that is the intention. They're supposed to be destroyed. But this isn't one of those. And you could say, look, here's proof, please. And an arbitrator could look at that and look at all the evidence and say, you're right. This is a malfunction. Since we've decided that the intention outranks execution, I will, for a fee, enter an order after considering all the evidence and looking for contrary mm-hmm. evidence, and accepting, expert input, whatever. I will rule that this, wallet should have the tokens pulled back out of it and given back to the owners. And then block producers review it. They make sure he's an actual arbitrator, it's an actual case, and so forth, and all the various sanity checks. And then you can make that happen. But what you can't do is, as an arbitrator, randomly roam around the landscape finding things to arbitrate on and start reassigning property to people. You don't get to pick and choose. People come to you mm-hmm. based on a transaction between the two of them where they named you as their arbitrator, and your case affects the transaction and the parties involved, not random third parties. And so it's extremely tightly bound. An arbitrator that acts outside of those bounds would be fired, sanctioned. They could lose their performance bond. A block producer who voted in favor of an invalid arbitration would almost certainly get fired. The token holders would not stay kindly to that. And so we've got this series of checks and balances where people with power have no authority, people with the authority have no power, and the voters don't trust any of them. It's perfect, we think. And we'll see, right? I mean, give it a year, Let's do the same show in 2019, right. And we'll find out how it went.
Sure. That wasn't the answer to the what is the difference between the offline political world and the online political world.
Oh, right.
You gave me the answer to that, which was that the block producers' roles are very tightly bound, which was
extremely tightly prescribed.
Point. I thought my theory was that because in the offline political world, it actually takes 4 years for you to actually fire them. So they've got 4 years of going.
So it's 2 minutes and 6 seconds.
Right, exactly. So you can only misbehave for that amount of time, not because politicians can misbehave for 3.9 years before they're even at risk of being voted out. So
Yeah,
I
short
wondered
of impeachment or something.
right, but I mean, breaking your manifesto promises, that's a classic offline politician. It's almost part of the job description, right? It's always become a joke.
I will tell you, I was looking at political promises and I found something written by like Cato the Elder or some Roman, politician. And his advice, he was writing advice to some young man. He said, promise everybody everything because that's what they want. And if you later have to break your promises, they don't mind it that much. But if you refuse to promise during the campaign, they get really mad at you and they'll vote against you. So always promise everything. And I'm reading this going, this is horrible.
But that's tragically true.
There's a bunch of us voters, I have to include myself, apparently love to be lied to, which means we end up with the politicians we deserve, which is sort of, I don't know, like Hamlet-style tragedy right there.
Right. Unless there is a faster feedback loop, like we just mentioned, right?
Feedback loop and limited powers.
Feedback loop and limited powers. Exactly. Sure. So we kind of touched on the second part of that question, which was, is there such a thing as an ungoverned blockchain? I think you kind of answered that as yes.
I would say, yeah. Any of I call them law of the jungle blockchains or the Bitcoins.
The ones that have 2 of the 4 criteria.
It just has 2 of the 4 forces. It's got the code and the market forces, and that's it. And if you can assemble, 51% attacks on the hash power, hey, great, I just did a double spend, haha. And you can have law enforcement outside the chain chase the person, I guess. But who'd they steal from exactly, and what's your proof? And it's very
difficult
murky.
to get them to understand the laws at play there, right?
Yeah, and everything's a bearer instrument, and there's no court of appeal. There's not even a community that's having any kind of social agreement on things. So you haven't broken the social contract. The social contract on a lot of crypto chains appears to be, steal if you can. It's awesome. Which tells you what kind of people they get.
True. That will attract a certain kind of attacker that knows that as long as they can exploit the code, the minute that Ethereum leaves the wallet, you've got it, right? Yeah. You've robbed the bank.
Yeah, there's no recourse. It's almost impossible to prove anything. By the time law enforcement traces it down weeks or months later, it's untraceable.
Right.
I think that's part of why there was such an uproar when the block producers chose to freeze some accounts that had apparently been phished, and the arbitrator, who initially refused jurisdiction on the case, was then asked to review what the block producers had done, which is part of our setup. Block producers are empowered by their contract. Their Ricardian contract, English language contract, says they can act in an emergency, and the expectation is they will immediately call for an arbitrator to rule on what they just did, so that nobody else has to. Mm-hmm. It's like if you, heaven forbid, ever had to stop someone breaking into your house at gunpoint, you don't just shoot them because you can, or tie them up, leave them in your basement for a week. You immediately call the police.
Right.
Because you want the proper authorities in there as soon as possible, and to kind of make sure everyone around you knows that, no, I don't just tie people up in my basement for weeks at a time normally.
Given the chance.
That would be very disturbing and probably the subject of a made-for-TV movie.
Sure.
And not good for you over the long term. So in that same spirit, it's look, I just exceeded my mandate because I felt it was an emergency, and I want a ruling, please. Mm-hmm. And the faster the ruling comes down, the faster, if I'm wrong, I can stop doing it. Maybe pay a penalty or make redress or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so I think my personal opinion is there was an enormous amount of uproar in the Twitter Reddit intelligentsia. That was a joke. The brain trust, if you will, of the trolls, the brighter trolls of Twitter, Twittit and Reddit, decided that this was evil and wrong and bad, and it's a broken blockchain because they froze accounts, and you stop the theft. You can't do that. Who do these people think they are? And the short answer is, we think we're a governed blockchain, thank you very much. And the code is not the law. And We will review it, through arbitration, and if someone turns out to have acted wrongly, they will lose a judgment, and they will be forced to pay whoever they hurt some sort of penalty on pain of being thrown out. And of course, block producers have pockets, right? They're earning a couple $1,000 a day. If they did act badly, they're in a position to pay. We know that. And they'll probably pay very readily and very gladly so as not to lose standing. Say, hey, super sorry, did my best, didn't mean to do anything wrong. Hey, here, let me make you whole. I'll do better next time. I don't think anyone's going to hold that against them. And for what it's worth, I'm glad I wasn't a block producer faced with what they were faced with, because it's a tough area. It's a gray area. Everything's new. Yeah. We don't have settled traditions of what to do in cases of alleged theft. By the way, if anybody was thinking of using a spurious theft claim as an attack vector to freeze somebody else's account, my understanding is to even talk to an arbitrator about that, you would have to provide your name, get on a video, give a video deposition, prove ownership of the Ethereum key, provide receipts and bank records of your purchase, go through a third-party identity validator like Huyu and prove your identity, and possibly post a performance bond in case your request for a freeze was turned out to have harmed somebody else and you were actually in the wrong. That bond would then stand in for your fine that you might have to pay. So you have to do all of that to freeze somebody else's account or your own account if it's stolen. Mm-hmm. And believe me, if you've got $20,000, $30,000, $50,000 in an account and it really is yours, you would totally do all of those things.
You would do that.
And that makes it a pretty sticky, hard to spam attack vector, I think. We'll see.
Sure. So, Thomas, I know you're short on time, so I'll thank you for being on the Cryptoverse, and I'll invite you back on soon.
I look forward to it. Thank you so much, Chris.
Take care, Thomas.
Bye.